one of the other names used to refer to the devil. Good. So in this chapter, we're going to see Jo meet her biggest foe yet. What I mean by foe is an enemy. Okay? We're going to see Jo kind of having to conquer her biggest issue yet. Okay? Jo meets Apollyon. Where are you going? Asked Amy, coming into Meg and Jo's room one Saturday afternoon and finding them getting ready to go out with an air of secrecy, which excited her curiosity. Never mind. Little girls shouldn't ask questions, returned Jo sharply. Well, that's kind of rude. All Amy asked is where she was going. Amy bridled up at this insult. What does bridled up mean? Micah? And she was like, oh, just like I was. Well, that's rude. Amy bridled up at this insult and determined to find out the secret, even if she teased for an hour. She turned to Meg, who never refused her anything for very long, and began to coax. What does coax mean? Brooklyn? It's not on there, sorry. What do you think it means? Say stuff what? Not angrily. If you're trying to coax someone into something. Kind of bribe them, yes. So Amy turns to Meg, who can't really refuse her for very long, and starts saying, please, Meg, please tell me. I just want to know. And eventually Meg's going to give it. Who never refused her anything very long and began to coax. Meg held her tongue, however, so Amy used her eyes, kind of like this. When she saw Meg slip a fan, not a fan like a blowing fan, but like a fan like this, you know. Okay. Back then it was like something you would carry, almost like a purse. It was like an accessory you'd carry when you're going somewhere fancy. So when she saw Meg slip a fan into her pocket, she cried, I know! You're going to the theater to see 7 Castles with Laurie. Please let me come, she added pleadingly. I've been sick with this cold for so long and shut up, and I'm just dying for some fun. Do, Meg. Oh, I'll be ever so good. Amy looked as pathetic as she could. Oh, suppose we take her with us, began Meg. If she goes, I shan't, said Jo crossly, for she disliked the trouble of overseeing a fidgety young child when she wanted to just enjoy herself. It will be very rude, anyway, after Laurie only invited us. Yeah. Sorry, go run. Not run, literally, but go. Well, when he comes back, you can go. Amy began to put her boots on, saying in her most aggravating way, I shall go. Meg says I may. Oh, no. You shan't stir a step, so you may just stay right where you are, scolded Jo, crosser than ever, having just pricked her finger in a hurry. Sitting on the floor with one boot on, Amy began to cry, and so Meg began to reason with her when Laurie called from below, and the 2 girls hurried downstairs, leaving their sister wailing. Why is Amy upset? Riley? According to the theater. Who says she can go? Everyone? Meg. But who says, Jo. Just as the party was setting out, Amy called over the banisters in a threatening tone. You'll be sorry for this, Jo March. See if you ain't. Oh, fiddlesticks, returned Jo, slamming the door. They had a charming time, but Jo's pleasure had a drop of bitterness in it. The Fairy Queen's yellow curls reminded her of Amy, and between the acts of the play, she amused herself with wondering what her sister would do to make her sorry for it. What does Jo worry about while at the theater? Manny? How Amy's going to get revenge. When they got home, they found Amy reading in the parlor. She assumed an injured air as they came in, never lifted her eyes from her book or asked a single question, but let Beth inquire about the play and receive the glowing description. So they come home, okay? And normally both girls are, how was it? Did you have a good time? Tell me all about it. So they come home and Beth acts like this, but Amy acts like this. Okay? Basically ignoring them. On going up to her room, Joe's first look was toward the bureau, or like the her dresser drawers, basically. For their last quarrel, her last fight with Amy, had ended in Amy turning Joe's top drawer upside down all over the floor. Everything was in its place, however, and Joe decided that Amy had forgiven and forgotten her wrong. She was like, I can't find anything wrong, so maybe she just didn't do anything. There, Joe was mistaken. For the next day, she made a discovery that produced a tempest. What's a tempest? Chloe? Yeah, it's usually kind of storm, okay? And it made quite a storm amongst the house. Meg, Beth, and Amy were sitting together late in the afternoon when Joe burst into the room and demanded breathlessly, has anyone taken my book? Meg and Beth both said no at once and looked surprised. Amy poked the fire and said nothing. Joe was upon her in a minute. Amy, you got it. No, I haven't. You know where it is then. No, I don't. That's a fib! Or a lie, cried Joe, taking her by the shoulders and looking fierce enough to frighten a much braver child than Amy. Scold as much as you like. You'll never see your silly old book again, cried Amy. Why not? I burned it up. Yes. What? My little book that I was so fond of and I worked over and I meant to finish it before Father got home? Have you really burned it? Said Joe, turning very pale while her eyes kindled and her hands clutched Amy nervously. Yes, I did. I told you I'd make you pay for being so cross yesterday, and I have. So, Amy got no further, for Joe's hot temper mastered her. She shook Amy until her teeth chattered in her head, crying in a passion of grief and anger, you wicked, wicked girl! I never can write it again, and I'll never forgive you as long as I live! You have to understand, this book was not like any other book that Joe owned. This was a book that Joe was writing. And she had been writing this book for months and years and years and years. And she meant she was trying to finish it before her father got back from the war. But Amy burned it up. She had to start at the very beginning and rewrite the whole thing. Meg flew to rescue Amy and Beth to pacify Joe. What does pacify mean? Layla? But Joe was quite beside herself. With a parting box on her sister's ear, it's like a punch, she rushed out of the room and up to the garret to finish her fight alone. The storm cleared up below, for Mrs. March came home, and, having heard the story, soon brought Amy to a sense of the wrong she had done to her sister. Joe's little book of fairy tales was the one pride of her heart, and she was regarded by her family as a literary sprout of great promise. She had just copied them with great care and had destroyed the old manuscript so that Amy's bonfire had consumed the loving work of several years. So, like I said, all her life, Jo has been writing short little fairy tales. She had just finished rewriting all the little stories into one big book, and she got rid of the other copies because she didn't need them. She had them all right here in one copy. Well, Amy burned up that one copy, and now she doesn't have them anymore. They're not written anywhere else. It seemed like a small loss to others, but to Jo, it was a dreadful calamity, and she felt it could never be made up to her. Beth mourned as if for a departed kitten, and Meg refused to defend her pet. What is her pet it's referring to? Who is Meg refusing to defend? Connor? Amy. Mrs. March looked grave and grieved, and Amy now regretted the act more than any of them. All of a sudden, she realized what she's done. She didn't just get Jo back. That was a really wicked thing to do. When the tea bell rang, Jo appeared, looking so grim that it took all Amy's courage to say meekly, "Please forgive me, Jo. I'm very, very sorry." "I never shall forgive you," was Jo's stern answer, and from that moment she ignored Amy entirely. No one spoke of the great trouble, for all had learned by experience that when Jo was in that kind of mood, words were wasted. The wisest course was to wait till some little accident softened Jo's resentment and healed the breach. It was not a happy evening, for the sweet home peace was disturbed. Does it do any good to try and talk to Jo about it? No. Better to just wait until something smaller and kind of funny happens, and then you kind of try to get her on in a good mood. Then you can talk to her about it. If you try to talk to her now, you're never going to get anywhere. As Jo received her goodnight kiss from her mom, Mrs. March whispered gently, "My dear, don't let the sun go down on your anger. Forgive each other, help each other, and begin again tomorrow." Okay, don't let the sun go down upon your anger. That's actually a biblical phrase. It comes from, I think, the book of Proverbs. But the idea is don't go to bed angry. Don't let a problem with someone just sit and get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and never deal with it. Instead, kind of like a poison tree, exactly. Instead, work it out with that person before you even go to bed. Don't go to bed without having resolved that problem with someone else. Otherwise, you're just holding a grudge against them for no reason. Jo wanted to lay her head on her mother's shoulder and cry her grief and anger all away, but she felt so deeply injured that she really couldn't quite forgive her yet. So she winked hard and said gruffly so that Amy could hear, "It was an abominable thing, and she doesn't even deserve to be forgiven." With that, she marched off to bed, and there was no merry or confidential gossip that night. The next morning, Amy was much offended that her overtures of peace had been repulsed. Jo still looked like a thundercloud, and nothing went well all day. Aunt March had an attack of the fidgets. Meg was sensitive. Beth looked grieved and wistful when she got home, and Amy kept making aggravating remarks. "Everybody is so hateful today. I'll just ask Laurie to go skating. He will put me to rights, I know it," said Jo to herself, and off she went. When Amy heard the clash of skates, she looked out and exclaimed, "She promised that I could go next time, for this is the last ice we shall have. But it's no use to ask such a crosspatch to take me." She's like, "I tried to ask Jo to forgive me, but she won't accept it. I don't know what else to do. And now she's going skating. I was supposed to go this time. She promised she would take me, but it's no use. She won't even talk to me." Does Amy truly understand why Jo is so upset? No. To Amy, it's just a little book of fairy tales. What's the big deal? I burned up your book, but you wouldn't take me to the theater. But what she doesn't get is that that is Jo's prized possession, and it was years of work put into one thing, and she just burned all of it. Brian?
Almost like suddenly that paper you find and
Okay. So Meg says, "Don't say that. You were very naughty, and it is hard to forgive the loss of her precious little book. But I think she might do it now, said Meg. Go ahead and go after them. Don't say anything until Joe has got all good-natured with Lori. Then do some kind thing, and I'm sure she'll be friends again with all her heart. I'll try, said Amy, for the advice suited her. After a flurry to get ready, she ran after the friends, who were just disappearing over the hill. It was not far to the river, but both were ready before Amy had reached them. Joe saw her coming and turned her back. Lorry did not see, for he was carefully skating along the shore, sounding the ice, for a warm spell had preceded the cold snap. What does sounding the ice mean? Riley?
Like testing if it's like break, because the middle part is like very thin.
Very good.
If you step in it,
Very good. So whenever a pond or a lake has frozen over, the edges of the lake are always thicker ice than the center. Okay? So before you go skating on it, you always obviously want to check how thick the ice is to make sure it can hold up your weight. You won't fall through the ice. Okay? So Lori is testing. He's kind of skating around carefully, seeing where it starts to crack and stuff like that, and then staying in the more thick parts. So Lori is testing it out to make sure that they can go skating safely. Okay? So he doesn't see Amy coming up behind him. Joe sees him, but she's like, ugh, turns around and ignores her. Okay? She sees Amy. Says, ugh, turns around and ignores her. Lori says, I'll go on to the first bend and see if it's all right before we begin to race, Amy heard him say, as he shot away looking like a young Russian in his fur-trimmed coat and cap. Joe heard Amy coming up, panting after her run, and blowing on her fingers as she tried to put on her skates, like this. But Joe never turned around and went slowly zigzagging down the river, taking a bitter, unhappy satisfaction in her sister's troubles. Basically meaning she's enjoying seeing Amy struggle with her skates. As Lori turned the bend, he shouted back, Keep near to the shore! It isn't safe in the middle. So don't go in the middle. It's too thin. We can't skate there. Just stay on the shore where it's thicker. We'll be safe. Joe heard him, but Amy was still struggling to her feet and didn't catch a word. Joe glanced over her shoulder, and a little demon said in her ear, No matter whether she heard or not, let her take care of herself. Lori had vanished around the bend. Joe was just at the turn, and Amy was far behind, just now striking out toward the smoother ice in the middle of the river. For a minute, Joe stood still with a strange feeling in her heart, but then she resolved to go on. But something held and turned her around, just in time to see Amy throw up her hands and go down, with a sudden crash of rotten ice, a splash of water, and a cry that made Joe's heart stand still with fear. She tried to call Lori, but her voice was gone. She tried to rush forward, but her feet seemed to have no strength in them, and for a second she could only stand motionless, staring with a terror-stricken face at the little blue hood above the black water. So what happened? Brooklyn? Exactly. Now, you need to understand, when someone falls through the ice, okay, there's a current of water flowing underneath the water, correct? If the current is so strong that it pulls them away from where the hole is, and now they're trapped over here where the ice is above the water, they can't get out, and they drown. Not only that, but if the ice is frozen over, what's the temperature like outside? Freezing. A human body can only last for a few minutes, maybe, in cold water until it completely goes numb and you die. You can't swim, your heart stops working, all these things. So Amy has not very long in order to survive. Okay? And that means Joe and Lori have to get over to her, help pull her out of the hole, and then they have to get her soaking wet all the way back home in the freezing cold weather, during which she can get hypothermia, she can catch pneumonia, she could have some of her limbs can go into frostbite and fall off. Okay? Lots of things for which they don't have advanced medicine for. A lot of times this meant death for a lot of people. Okay? All because Joe refused to tell her about the middle of the ice because she was still mad about the book. Brian?
So, once my dad, I'm pretty sure it was skating, but when he lived out in the country as a kid,
Mm-hmm.
and so there's like really fun.
Mm-hmm.
One time he got fun, and then he fell through,
Mm-hmm.
and then luckily they had like a road nearby, so
Mm-hmm.
he caught on to run home because his legs are freezing ice on them.
Mm-hmm.
And he just feel that entire
Mm-hmm. Yep, it can lead to hypothermia. It may not always mean death, but even today though, it's still very, very dangerous. And it can cause a lot of complications. Yes.
his friends who were at the lake, and like I went to the mountain lake, and they found in the ice. Both of his friends were able to get out, but he fell in. They were able to get him out, but then basically almost died.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Exactly. Ooh,
Oh, that wouldn't help.
that's crazy. All right. Okay. So something rushed swiftly. So Joe saw her fall and instantly freezes from fear. She knows she has to help, but she's stuck. Something rushed swiftly by her, and Lori's voice cried out, "Bring a rail! Quick! Quick!" How she did it, she never knew. But for the next few minutes, she worked as if possessed, blindly obeying Lori, who was quite self-possessed. So she's kind of like, she's not sure how, but somehow she just starts doing what he tells her to do. She's still kind of in a state of shock, but she's at least doing what he's asking her to do. Lying flat on the ice, he held Amy up by his arm and hockey stick until Joe dragged a rail from the fence, and together they pulled the child out, who was more frightened than hurt. "Now then, we must walk her home as fast as we can. Pile all of our things on her," cried Lori, wrapping his coat around Amy. Shivering, dripping, and crying, they got Amy home, and she fell asleep, rolled in blankets before a hot fire. During the whole bustle, Joe had scarcely spoken, but flown about, looking pale and wild, with her dress torn and her hands cut and bruised by ice and rails and buckles. When Amy was comfortably asleep, Mrs. March called Joe to her and began to bind up the hurt hands. "Are you sure she's safe?" whispered Joe, looking remorsefully at the golden head, which might have been swept away from her sight forever under the treacherous ice. "She is quite safe, dear. She is not hurt, and won't even take cold, I think, because you were so sensible to covering and getting her home quickly," replied her mother cheerfully. "No, Lori did it all. I only let her go. Mother, if she should have died, it would be my fault." And Joe dropped down beside the bed in a passion of penitent tears, telling all that had happened. Why does Joe blame herself? Aiden?
Because Amy mad. She's an Amy mad, which is very different than Joe, which is Amy again. So Joe was mad at Amy for 2 days, and so she didn't tell her about ice because she was so mad about it.
Very good.
So now she feels really bad that she fell in.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it is Joe's fault. She knew that Amy did not hear Lori say not to go near the middle. But she was still so mad, she refused to tell her and said, she can deal with it on her own. And in return, she almost died. Here's Joe. "It's my dreadful temper. I try to cure it. I think I have. And then it breaks out worse than ever. Oh, Mother, what shall I do? What shall I do?" cried poor Joe in despair. "Watch and pray, dear. Never get tired of trying, and never think it is impossible to conquer your fault," said Mrs. March, kissing Joe's wet cheek tenderly. "Yeah, but you don't know. You can't even guess how bad it is. It seems as if I could do anything when I'm in an angry passion. I get so savage I could hurt anyone and enjoy it. I'm afraid I will do something dreadful someday and spoil my life and make everybody hate me. Don't cry so bitterly, but remember this day and resolve with all your soul that you will never know another one like it. Joe, dear, you think your temper is the worst in the world, but mine used to be just like it. Yours, mother? Why, you're never angry. And for the moment, Joe forgot remorse in her surprise. Well, I've been trying to cure it for 40 years, and I've only succeeded in controlling it. I'm angry nearly every day of my life, Joe, but I have learned not to show it, and I still hope to learn not to feel it, even though it may take me another 40 years to do so. She felt comforted by the knowledge that her mother had a fault like hers. It made her own fault easier to bear and strengthened her resolution to cure it. Mother, are you angry when you fold your lips tightly together and go out of the room sometimes? Asked Joe. Yes, I've learned to check the hasty words that rise to my lips. Then I just walk away for a minute and give myself a little shake for being so weak and wicked, answered Mrs. March with a sigh and a smile as she smoothed and fastened up Joe's hair. Oh, tell me how you do it, Marmee dear. Well, your father usually helps me, Joe. He never loses patience, never doubts or complains, but always hopes and works and waits so cheerfully that one is ashamed to do anything otherwise before him. He has helped and comforted me and showed me that I must try to set a good example for my little girls. It was easier to try for your sakes than for my own. Oh, mother, if I'm ever half as good as you, I shall be satisfied, cried Joe, much touched. I hope you will be a great deal better, dear, but you must keep watch over your bosom enemy, as father calls it, or it may sadden, if not spoil, your life. What is Joe's bosom enemy or her Apollyon? Brian? Huh? That's what it means, but what is it for Joe? What is her like devil that she has to deal with all the time? Her struggle in life, her fault.
She's always getting annoyed because she acts with it.
Exactly. She's always getting annoyed or angry to the point where she acts out. Her temper can get the best of her. You have had a warning. Remember it, and try with all your heart and soul to master this quick temper before it brings you greater sorrow and regret than you have known today. I will try, mother. I truly will. But you must help. Riley?
Because she misses your
Yes. Good. It's making her miss her husband a lot. Make sure. Okay. So Joe begins to notice her mom's getting upset, and she says, "Oh, wait, have I grieved you? Have I made you upset?" Joe whispered anxiously. "No, dear. But speaking of your father reminded me how much I miss him, how much I owe him, and how faithfully I should watch and work to keep his little daughters safe and good for him." "Yeah, but you're the one that told him to go, mother. And you didn't even cry when he went. And you never complain now, or even seem as if you need any help," said Joe, wondering. "I gave my best to my country I love, and kept my tears until he was gone." Pause right there. What does she mean when she says, "I gave my country my best"? What is her best that she gave to her country? Luke? Her husband. Hmm? Why should I complain when we both have merely done our duty and will surely be happier for it in the end? If I don't seem to need help, it's because I have a better friend, even in father, to comfort and sustain me. Who's that? God. Jesus. My child, the troubles and temptations of your life are beginning, and they may be many, but we can overcome and outlive them all if you learn to feel the strength and tenderness of your heavenly Father as you do that of your earthly one. the more that you love and trust him, and the less you will depend on human power and wisdom. His love and care never tire or change, can never be taken from you, but may become the source of lifelong peace, happiness, and strength. Believe this heartily, and go to God with all your little cares and hopes, and your sins and sorrows, as freely and confidingly as you come to your mother. Jo's only answer was to hold her mother close, and the sincerest prayer she had ever prayed left her heart without words. Amy stirred and sighed in her sleep, and, as if eager to begin at once to mend her fault, Jo looked up with an expression on her face which it had never worn before. I let the sun go down on my anger. I wouldn't forgive her, and today, if it hadn't have been for Laurie, it might have been too late. Oh, how could I be so wicked? Said Jo, half aloud, as she leaned over her sister, softly stroking the wet hair that was scattered on the pillow. As if she heard, Amy opened her eyes and held out her arms, with a smile that went straight to Jo's heart. Neither said a word as they hugged one another close, and everything was forgiven and forgotten in one hearty kiss. The end for today. Okay? So, hopefully Jo has learned her lesson and it will not let her anger control her anymore.